I'm joined by the lovely Jeremy Keeley. So we'll just briefly introduce ourselves and then we'll talk about the format of today. So I'm Steve Hearson. I'm a consultant, a supervisor, coach, and also author of No Silver Bullet, Bursting the Bubble of the Organizational Quick Fix. And you have joined what is not, I wouldn't say regular, but an occasional series of events I run because I think plenty of other people are doing plenty of podcasts. And I much prefer the idea of hosting chewy conversations with people so we can get into some inquiry together. So this is what this is part of. Jeremy, would you like to say a few words about you?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I'm Jeremy Keeley. I'm what I would regard as a very simple developmental facilitator, and simple partly because that's kind of who I am, but partly because I love people to use the work I do with them again and again for themselves. So try and keep it straightforward as possible. And I regard myself as providing loving company while people work on themselves. And sometimes that love might be quite tough love. Yeah, thanks. Welcome here, everybody. Lovely to see you all. Some faces I haven't seen for a long time.
So we're not going to do whole group interventions. We've done it through your kind of the group introduction, sorry, through the medium of biscuits. So you'll trust you'll get to know each other as we go through the session. And this is how we're going to structure things. So we're gathering to, in a sense, build on a conversation that Jeremy and I have been having for a wee while together around this idea of what is too far. Where exactly is the line? How do we know it's in the right place? And just the admin bit, just some very loose suggestions. It'd be helpful to have mics off except when you're talking, cameras on if possible, because it'd be lovely to see you. Please raise hands or throw passing cats or small children at the screen if you want to talk, just so that we know that you want to chip in. And obviously we're recording. Is there anything else that anybody wants to make explicit by way of an agreement for us as a group as we chat today? If so, just speak now or forever hold thy peace. I will take silence as a no, we're happy, Jeremy and Steve. Brilliant. So before we go any further, what you're going to find today is that me and Jeremy, as much as anything else, want to offer you some questions to deepen your own reflection. And we want to just drop these in now and encourage you to maybe take a screenshot or just notice them and be chewing on these as Jeremy and I start. Okay? Because this is not obviously about me and Jeremy per se, it's about all of us and us as practitioners and representatives of people who do work in organizations, whether we be practitioners or leaders or indeed anything else. So just notice your response to these questions. To what extent do you judge yourself as someone who goes too far or not far enough, or neither? No need for a response just now, but notice what that evokes in you. Okay. So Jeremy and I are going to briefly do a bit of framing, and then we're going to go into a couple of group inquiries, and then we're going to leave you with a set of questions to take away. For transparency, there are a set of questions that are drawn from, I think, two of the sets of reflective questions in my book, which I'm told, there wasn't the intention I had, but more than a couple of people have said to me that the questions can be quite squirmy. So we're leaving them with you in the hope that maybe you do some useful squirming as you reflect on your own practice. Because me and Jeremy have both been squirming a bit as we've talked about this territory. So that's the agenda. Hopefully that's in the territory you're expecting. And if not, I'm sure you'll help us shape it. Jeremy, shall we just do a wee bit of framing? Just for a few minutes? Where do you want to start? Just for clarity, everybody, me and Jeremy have not planned this in a kind of very detailed way. We're doing this in a more emergent way. Where do you want to start, Jeremy?
Well, I think Steve, it starts with you. So we ran an event in December last year with for Saddler Heath around challenge, and we had conversations with each other about your not intention, maybe your description of yourself as being a fly in the ointment when you're doing the work. And I suppose that was the last thing that I would have described myself as. So that's where we started, really, isn't it? Kind of at opposite ends of some sort of, maybe not completely opposite ends, but at opposite ends of some sort of spectrum. You might or might not be regarded as being too challenging sometimes, and I definitely am not regarded as that. In fact, I have been given the feedback that I'm too nice or not challenging enough sometimes, and so that's where we started with this. You therefore might be, I think you felt that you might be, sometimes have gone over the line too far. You might have taken it too far of a line. I certainly sometimes feel like I might not have gone far enough to really support my client. I might not have challenged something that needed to be challenged. And I have to say it's not intentional, but it might be when I'm not feeling as confident as I could, or when I'm not quite sure of my own position. But that's not the point, really. So it's kind of where do we? That's where we got into. Where do we draw the line when we're working with our clients? And is it possible that we either take it too far so that our clients don't actually get the value they really need, or do we not go far enough so they don't actually get the value they really need? I don't know. How does that sound to you?
Yeah, so that's kind of really reminded me of a stance that I started to develop when I wrote the book, because I came to the conclusion that unless consultants and change practitioners particularly are able to hold some degree of a contrarian position, or to embody that they are going to question and challenge, then what is the point of us? Because we do not get employed by our clients to maintain the status quo. We can be employed if we're there as a pair of hands to support business as usual, but certainly when it comes to change work, typically in the work I do, I'm not employed because a client wants things to stay the same. You wouldn't invite me in, and many of my peers. Now, if you follow that to its logical conclusion, that then raises a question. If I'm being employed by a client to help things to evolve and change, it begs the question not only what specifically are we agreeing needs to change, but it also invites us to consider this question of what is too far. So if you're my client, Jeremy, how are we going to know if my support and challenge is taking you to a place which is not just uncomfortable, but it's arguably destabilizing or damaging? But equally, what are the risks of me not taking you far enough? That through my own anxiety of offending you, of being too challenging, of upsetting you or your colleagues, that I decide that you can't go a certain place. And this sharpened for me a few years ago when I was talking to Keith Jones, who wrote with his partner Tess, wrote a wonderful book called Provoke, which is all about facilitation. And we were talking about a client I was working with, and I was describing how my sense of her was that as she talked, that she was incredibly hard on herself. And I said to her, so on a scale of 1 to 10, how hard on yourself are you typically? And she said, oh, probably at least a 9. And I said to her, yeah, I thought so. And Keith said to me, what you could have said to her was, well, why don't you turn it up to 12 then? What would happen if you did that? And the point he was making was that my assumption was that what was useful for the client was to almost collude with their assessment of how hard on themselves they were. And a usefully compressive intervention might be to help them see exactly the degree to which they're too hard on themselves. So just to kind of close the loop on this, my tagline, the right kind of fly in the ointment, which I changed recently to the right kind of fly in your ointment, because it's not the ointment, it's yours as the client. I've been in an inquiry for about a year and a half around data I've got and the feedback I've had from people to kind of work out, where have I gone too far? What does it say about me? And what does it say about others?
Yeah.
So that's kind of, yeah, I'll stop there. That's kind of where I then, that's my mirror of your niceness.
Yeah. And I guess the representing the other side of the polarity is sort of wanting clients to go away feeling much more confident, much more empowered in themselves. It not being about me, but about them, and helping them to have sometimes to have an experience of working together powerfully, that they can then build on in future times. So it's kind of, so it's not because I'm in danger myself of holding myself as wrong for not being challenging enough. That's so it's the inquiry you and I have had very useful to me in thinking, actually, no, there are times when you're genuinely committed to the client taking stuff forward with each other, and therefore sort of not about the label I put on myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of a shadow here, and we're going to move fairly shortly, I think, to our first group inquiry, which is, if you look at the research around what clients most look for in a consultant, say, what the research shows you is that what they look for is somebody with expertise in something. They want an expert. Yes, they look for other things, but more than anything else, they want an expert, which then begs the question, how many of us actually disabuse our clients of the idea that we actually maybe don't have the expertise they're looking for? And the reason I mention this, and I've talked about this before on sessions like this, is because that's actually another kind of line in there. If I'm not ethical enough to disabuse my client of the fact that I may not know what I'm talking about relative to their need, then I'm never going to go too far. I'm not even potentially going to go somewhere useful. So I think this has got layers. This isn't just about, individual interventions. It's a more profound question.
Yeah. And it just occurred to me right now, actually, listening to you, that also there's something around the terminology we use. So you use the word consultant, and I use the word facilitator and coach. And I wonder whether our opinion of ourselves, if you like, also in that respect, helps us, puts us on a particular in a particular space on that spectrum.
Which I hadn't even thought of, which is, to what extent does the label I choose to use and how I construe that label determine the extent to which I construe a particular notion of what is too far.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good. So let's hold there. And that is our attempt to kind of share with you how we ended up here with you. And we're going to offer you this as a frame for a first inquiry in small groups. Talk about your responses to those initial questions that I asked you earlier. I'll put them into chat in a moment. Maybe share the values and principles you would like to work to that underpin those responses, because however you respond to those questions, that is going to tell you something about what you value, the stance you take and the stance you hold, and what are the assumptions that support or contradict those. And I'm actually going to weave in something that, Jeremy, you and I haven't talked about, because I'm beginning to wonder whether lurking here in this too far thing is, for each of us on this session, how important is it that you are liked? And I'm being really specific in my language. I'm distinguishing, making a distinction between respect and like. Because if what's important to you is that you're liked by your client, then how does that influence you the moment what is most needed to be of service to the client is for you to run the risk of a rupture in the harmony and the potential liking that your client or you have for each other? Does that make sense? Yeah. So I'll pause there. Any questions on that? Is that clear enough? Yeah. I will quickly grab those initial questions I asked, which were those three. and I will drop them in the chat so you've got those there. I'm going to, assuming that Zoom allows me, I'm going to put you into groups of 3 for a bit more intimacy today. How many of us are there? Let's have a look. Let's see. There may end up, okay, it looks like it's going to be everybody in 3s, then maybe 1, 2. And I'm going to give you 15, let's have a look. 15, 20. No, let's give you 20 minutes for this, I think. Give you the best part of 20 minutes for this. Okay. So, if there's no questions, the room's opening now, and we will see you at the end of this bit. Are you there, Sarah? Ah, there she is. She's gone. How was that, you think? Oh, you're on mute, mate.
I'm just confirming that you didn't mean me to go into room 5.
No. You can stay out. I mean, you can do if you want.
No, I'm quite happy to let it flow. Yeah, I thought it was good.
Yeah,
in a way,
so
we're exactly presenting it as we intended, aren't we? As a kind of
yeah.
By the way, just in terms of be liked, it suddenly occurred to me: there's be liked, be respected, but there's also
the button instead of.
You're just so keen, Emma. You're keen. You're keen.
I was in the middle of saying something and I thought, "Oh, get rid of that box," and I clicked it and out I went.
You went too far, Emma.
I was actually saying, I don't think you can go too far if you're in that kind of relationship. And I clicked the button and off I went.
Hi, Dan.
Dan, I'm so sorry. I clicked the button.
I thought you did, yeah.
Sorry, Silk. I clicked the button.
No worries.
Oh, isn't it a joy? I feel like an old lady now for clicking the button.
I'm back. So we'd love to get a sense of what you talked about.
Take you around, I'll pick you up.
What did you talk about in your groups?
Well, something I'm waving, but no one's taking any notice of me.
Oh, didn't see you waving. Speak away.
Okay, see, Steve, there's someone being direct, maybe not too much. Just one of the things that came up I thought was really interesting was the difference between whether you're working as an external consultant, coach, facilitator, or whether you're working internally, and all the different issues with the different systems you might be in, and therefore both the expectation and the complexity of the relationships you have when you're the internal person, whether as opposed to the external person that may be given a bit more rope, may be given a bit more of a longer leash to work with than the person who's running leadership development, whatever type of work they're leading. And that came up in our conversation. I just think that's that the system you're in the moment is really interesting to look at. And that's me done. Thank you.
I'm pleased you said that, because it sharpens something that when I work with internals doing practice development, I often ask them a question, which is, there's 2 questions you need to answer. One is, how do I progress in this organization? The other one is, how do I be of most service? And those 2 questions at some point will be in opposition. And it's very different for those of us who are externals, because if I hack off a client with the best of intent, I'm there with positive intent to do good work, but if I hack them off, I have other work. But if my mortgage is dependent on being paid by my employer, then the jeopardy inherent in answering that question is different. You're absolutely right in that. Although lurking underneath it, one could argue the line around what is too far, there's two lines. One is the existential one, do I lose my job? But what the client needs, that line is still the same.
Interesting.
The too far line, as far as what is needed by the client, is arguably still the same.
And if I just add to that, Steve, I think that's part of what we're paid for. We're paid to be fired easily, I believe. You know, as quite funny.
Debbie, you're wafting your hand.
I'm not intentionally wafting it, but yes, I put it up. I had a lovely conversation with Anka, and I guess we were reflecting in terms of the sort of opposing that you position, that it's context and time specific. And that it's important that we have the ability to move and recognize that it probably doesn't serve to only be the one that goes too far or only be the one that perhaps can be too gentle. And also the quality of the relationship, the stage of the relationship with the client. If we've come in from the very beginning and in part of our contracting has been talking about exploring the boundaries and how do we stretch those boundaries. But if we pick up a client, you know, quite far through and maybe there's some fragility in the relationships, maybe some repair work. So I guess there's the choicefulness. And then the final point was, where does what position we take interact with the responsibility of the client? And again, in those choices, what am I contributing or taking from the responsibility from the client? What happens after going too far? What support systems, you know, do they have? So it raised lots of questions as well, and sort of reminded us to be really intentional when we are not just going up against a boundary, interestingly, whose boundary, but also what happens when we go beyond a boundary. So thank you to Anka.
Thank you. And the second hand, who was the second? I saw another one. Wait a minute.
Hello.
Hello there, Rachel, it was you. Sorry.
Hello. Yes. I would just like to build on what Debbie said. She took the words right out of my mouth in that last sentence, which was about intentionality. I had a really interesting conversation with Sarah about what is our intention in the room, and how does that serve the goals and needs of the clients in the moment, whether we've had the chance to discuss that before or not. There was also something about we had a very interesting conversation about where is the challenge directed in the group. I'm thinking particularly about team coaching, whether the challenge is directed towards an individual or a small group within the whole group, or whether the challenge is being offered to the whole group, and how one might flex one's style depending on what sort of challenge one was offering. We were thinking very much about how we sat in the system to do that.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. And if I build both together, the two thoughts together, for me, you might not challenge a particular behaviour in the room, but you might challenge the fact that nobody else challenged that behaviour in the room.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Dick.
Sarah and I had an interesting conversation, but one of the things we talked about was, again, it's about context. And, you know, what's my role? Is it to tell the truth about this situation or issue, for example, or is it to help the client make a change as a result of? And so those are, I'll probably behave in different ways depending upon what those are and whether and if we've contracted about them, for example.
Nice. The question that's lurking for me here, and it's only just popped into my head, and maybe it's in something what you said there, Dick. It's pulled this out of me. But I'm sitting here wondering, in our group here, who has a really visceral experience of going too far and what happened? And I use the word visceral deliberately. Kat?
Trying to find the mute button. I'm also mindful that I've got kids in the background and one needs a lift somewhere in a minute. So if I get interrupted. Yeah, but I mean, it's a really interesting question, Steve, because I have been sacked. I've been taken off contracts and, you know, on more than one occasion. But I don't know that I went too far. And we were talking about this a little bit in our group, is actually they weren't ready or they didn't understand.
in terms of the client relationship or the organizations that I was working in at the time. And I think because I work a lot in public sector organizations, it's about people, it's about lived experience, it's about changing things, so my values are very strong in that. And I'm not in the market to take money to work on stuff that to me doesn't feel like it's actually really going to make a difference to the people that I'm there trying to make a difference with and for. So yeah, it's more about their readiness or their unwillingness, or they're looking for the wrong answers. They're looking, they're not going to get the solutions that they want. And one client asked me if I'd had training in how to keep the client happy. Actually, it was a consultancy firm who was working between the client and us. We're in a partnership arrangement, and I just went, but it's not my job to keep the client happy. I've been really clear with that right from the start, that actually we don't come in, we're not heavy, we work very gently, but we work with people's real experiences and stories, and sometimes it's really hard to hear, and we're not pushing for big policy change. We talked in our group about it as well, that it's about the little nudges, the little changes. How can we change the way people think or perceive? And if people are so closed off to changing the way they think or the way that they see things, then there's not a lot you can do. Sometimes there's certainly not a lot I can do. So yeah, it threw that up for us, really. Yeah,
I think what that sparks me, Kat, is two thoughts. One, the number of people who I meet in organizations who often are a bit downcast, who say, oh, I've been described as the organizational cynic, or I'm the troublemaker. And what becomes clear is they're just very good at asking questions that are uncomfortable and are pointing to something that is in the shadows, which is indicating that they found out where the lines are and they have gone too far. And I connect that to a piece of research that I'm still digging through, which I think, if I remember correctly, was talking about how, on the one hand, organizations encourage their people to challenge constructively more. And on the other hand, people who do challenge more are often then marked down in their performance appraisals. So there's a mismatch here between the narratives of we want people to challenge more. Do we? Sarah Bowles, you're waving.
Yeah, apologies. I don't know how to put my hand up electronically. I was looking through all the buttons on the bottom because I couldn't work it out. So I just do the in real life. When Dick and I were having the conversation, we talked a lot about is it the what you're saying or is it the how you're saying it? Yeah. And I think that there's something quite interesting about, you asked about visceral experiences. I've witnessed an experience of, a consultancy team who said all the right things and in all the right ways and then weren't there the next week. And it's because nobody really wanted to hear it. Our neurochemistry, we're designed to move away from things that feel too uncomfortable or painful. And you do occasionally get the people that go, do you know what, this is really uncomfortable, but I really need to hear this. You do get some of those people. But in boardroom environments, in some of the places that we're working, there is so much, I'm going to use the word pain or discomfort anyway. I think it's about calibrating, isn't it? Like what can be taken in what context and when. So, I might be able to have that conversation one-to-one with you because I've got the relationship, we've built some trust. Therefore, your line of tolerance, in your biology is much more open than if I do it so it's a very long-winded way of saying there were so many it depends that it became a really hard question to answer because there are so many other factors there that would require calibrating before working out the line and whose line.
Well, there's I think what you've just sparked for me is something that I wonder is lurking in the shadow here, because if you look at our group here, we are wonderfully monochrome, and there is a difference between me as a straight white middle-aged man offering a challenge and a client I've been working with recently who's an incredibly articulate, calm, powerful Black woman, and the experience she's having in her organization. And the line for me, I suspect, is a lot further away than it is for her. So the line is not, once it's agreed, the same for everybody. And I know, and I know this particular, for younger female practitioners I've worked with in clients, the line is very different for them. But I don't think we don't talk about that enough.
Yeah, Steve, just before we carry on, it also occurs to me that how do we know we've gone too far, even if we did get fired, even if we don't get included again? That's not necessarily a measure.
Yeah,
we might have said exactly the right thing that needed to be said for the client, and they couldn't deal with it. That doesn't mean we went too far. On the other hand, then how we express it might have been, did we express it in an enabling way, or did we express it in a judgmental way? Yeah.
We'll do Michael, we'll hear from you, and then we'll go into our second group inquiry. Michael, that's it, off the mute.
I think it's something we noticed in the small group, that we started talking about how we practice. And actually the question is an invitation to look at ourselves. How do we consider ourselves to be? And that for me is about how do I feel internally about confrontation, rupture? What's my relationship with power? Because those things will dictate how, whether I go near the line to start with, let alone how I am around the line, my willingness to step over it and take the risk of. And I think that is absolutely fundamental before we sort of talk about, well, what's the circumstances, what the context and what have you, is who am I as a practitioner? Where am I at with these things? What can I tolerate? So that we should conduct that inquiry of ourselves before we step into the ring, and start having those conversations at the contracting stage, and let alone in the work itself.
I think you're spot on, Michael. In fact, I think that's a lovely segue into what we're going to do next. And I know for me, if I would add to that, what's my limiting belief about myself? If I add it to that list of things you've said, and so in mine, for example, one of my limiting beliefs is that people only employ me because I'm a good egg, and I can easily go there, not because I'm a good consultant. I mean, so I agree with you. So it's what's my opinion of myself in this that counts as well. Thanks.
So this is our second set of questions. One of the things that Jeremy and I don't want to do is kind of keep this conversation purely in the realms of this space. We want to kind of lean into what's the implications of this conversation potentially for you in your practice or your work. So what has this conversation catalyzed or inspired or challenged you maybe to do more or less of, or to be more or less of? Practically, how might you make that happen or experiment with it? And what might the implications be for your clients and you? And of course, the obvious question of how will you know if you've gone too far? So really, this is an invitation for you to chew on, well, where are you exactly with your sense of too farness? And to really chew on how really do you know if you are actually going far enough in your work to be of service? So that's where we're going to invite you to go next. I am going to recreate the rooms simply because we've got one or two with the shifting group membership. There'll be one or two people left on their own. We were going to leave you in the same groups, but I think Jeremy will need to recreate them. So you will meet some new people. And let's see what we've got. Right, so there should be, I think, mostly threes with possibly 1, 2, if I've got this right. And we will give you about just over 15 minutes. Okay, so take a picture of those questions if you can. Jeremy, did you want to the instructions about the paper and pencil? Do that after. Okay, all right. See you shortly. shortly. Welcome back, everybody. So, as before, we'll have probably 10 minutes max of just farming this. What are the fruits of your conversations?
I can jump in.
Yeah, do.
Yeah, well, I had a lovely conversation with Sarah, and where are you? Where have you gone? I can't see you now.
Carolyn.
That's it. Yeah, Carolyn, yes. So I came a bit late to the party, but I suppose what I was just wondering, and you may have covered this, Steve, but I was interested in Jeremy, but the sort of how when we want to perhaps really step up, go too far in a sense, understanding how the system, I know in certain situations I'm very free to do that, and other systems I work in, I can really feel constrained and small, and that to me is a reflection as much about the system that I'm in than about my own ability to how I say something or when I say something. It's about the impact it's having, and that being able to speak to that experience about how the system is both impacting me, and that might reflect on those I'm working with. So say, for example, in the civil service where I'm working a lot, and that sense of people feeling small, not being able to speak up, feeling overwhelmed, disempowered, etc. And then how that, as a consultant coming in, that's also, I feel impacted by that. And how do I give voice to that? So bringing that systemic lens, I suppose. And the other bit I was just curious about was, and it picks a bit up what Jeremy was saying. There's an OD practitioner or writer called Roger Harrison, who's no longer with us now, but he spoke, only go as far as the client has the will, as you and the client have the will and capacity to go. And I just thought that to me was a nice way of how do we test our own will and our own capacity, but also the client, as it actually might be more disempowering or undermining if we or dangerous even. So that was just a couple of things. And I think the third thing was, and I'm just sharing what I shared in the group, but was that it may not be the spoken word, but it might be being more embodied or more creative, could be seen as going too far as well. And so not necessarily in being challenging in that way, but challenging in working in different ways that could be as seen as going too far, but maybe the stretch that's needed.
Lovely.
So that's
Thank you, Liz.
Don't know if the others want to add, Carolyn or Sarah.
Thank you.
Others? Debbie.
I've already spoken, but on the basis there's no other hand, but if there is a hand, please move to them. We had a lovely conversation, Elizabeth, Emma and I, and I guess just to get practical, was the need for sort of regular contracting and recontracting, but as forming as part of nearly the governance within the relationship. Questions that what are the assumptions that we're now making in terms of what good looks like and what our roles are in this? What are the knots in our tummies in how we've worked so far and identifying some of those boundaries, but having that as part of what the work is rather than just the work with and in the team. And then something about the mutuality. Emma was talking about, we also are serving ourselves. So are we recognizing what's in service of ourselves as well as in service of the client? And is that even okay to talk about and to expect? I hope I represented that well.
Yeah, you did. you know, we had this sort of theme running through the questions of, you know, let's also evaluate what is it we want from work as we go along, and that's going to ebb and flow. And sometimes you've pushed the client's boundaries quite far, but then it can affect your own. And, you know, it's worth recognizing that as well. And as Debbie said, you know, check in with your gut feeling and constant reevaluation, and make sure you're recontracting as part of the ongoing governance.
Carolyn, before you go, there's a couple of things in the three conversations that come to my mind. Is it's this idea of what's mine and what's the client's, and knowing that difference. And so if you go to, let's go to, you know, I in this system, I feel constrained and small, might be very powerful intervention, only if the client understands that what you're feeling might be representing what might be going on in the client. And it's the same with Debbie. It's just kind of like, I feel knotted in my stomach when I'm sitting here working here. Might be because I'm frightened of saying something that kind of might put me at risk, or it might be simply I feel knotted in my stomach because something goes on with the client and I'm perceiving that and picking it up. But sometimes the client doesn't necessarily understand that way of thinking, or understand, you know, so they switch off because they don't see the embodied link between us. It's a very interesting conversation. Thank you, Carolyn.
Yeah, in our group, we also talked about who's defining actually going too far. Is it your gut feeling, or is the other person defining too far, the group you're with? And we also came across this typical thinking of, you know, you're in the comfort zone, nothing is happening, you're in the learning zone and the oh shit zone. And if both parties are for a longer time in the oh shit zone, then maybe you yourself went too far and you also put too much on the table for the client, because you cannot handle it. And somebody earlier said in the room that it's also about recontracting. And maybe if you have the feeling stretching somebody too much, then you can recontract, or you can ask whether that's something where you both want to go. And that has also to do with how long are you interacting with those people? Is it a 2-day off, or is it a longer period? And then you can put it in chunks. But I guess it comes back to the gut feeling. Somebody said you need to be in tune with yourself to feel where you are and where the others you're working with are at the moment. So.
Very powerful, I think. I mean, just what came to my mind, Carolyn, was sometimes a client in a room is relying on you to be the only one who isn't judging them. And then when you call something on the basis of behavior or whatever, they might feel judged, and then they've lost you too, you know, in a way. So I don't know, that's the link I'm feeling is, and that might be too far, even though the system needs it. Yeah, great. Thank you. Rachel.
I had a really interesting conversation with Anka and Claire, and we were talking about, I was talking about how one might try and enable the challenge to emerge from the group, and try to facilitate that rather than being the source of it oneself. And that, but sometimes people don't choose to say things, and then that's where you get the choice point about whether I have to say something. And Anka said something that really struck me. She said, is it about the ability? How does it support the group's ability to have that difficult conversation when I've gone, when I'm not there? Which I thought was a really good point.
Nice. Yeah.
Thank you.
And Kat?
Yeah, we had a really good discussion actually, Lindsay and Dick, although I missed the first bit of it, which I apologise for, but we did talk around, I think Caroline just mentioned there, around how do we know what's too much in the first place, unless you try. Are we making assumptions about what we think is too much, based on what we're afraid of or what we perceive might happen? And Lindsay made an interesting point around colluding with organisations, colluding with the culture, with the structure, with the. Correct me if I'm wrong, Lindsay, in reflecting this back, but is that too far? And then that got us onto a conversation around, well, how much of our inaction then is too much, is too far? How much are we contributing to that in what we don't say, and what we don't do? And then where's that boundary between being part of something and telling truth versus affecting change? And there's been some conversation about those things being different things, but actually, can we affect change in the way that it needs to be if we don't tell truth or uncover truth or get to the truth in some way? And I think it brought us back to the whole thing, right, that actually a lot of this is around people and human connection and human relationships and how we find those points of connection and just being able to nudge people. So yeah, I think working with that, working much more intuitively in that space helps. But yeah, how much is too much?
Well,
what is our inaction too much? And yeah,
it's really interesting, Kat. So I'm just cutting because we're close to time, and I want to honour the time boundary. But I'm noticing in the last 5-10 minutes, we've got a kind of a transposing of too far and too much, and that gets me thinking about how the number of times I've met people who have wrestled with being told they are too much in their family systems or by their partners. And by extension, then we get into the space of what is your self-narrative and what might the shame be evoked when you start to have the experience of a client or people you're working with giving you the message or telling you outright, you've gone too far, you're too much. And our ability to discriminate and sift for our own archaic distress, our own valencies, our own, excuse the language, what is our shit and what is not, I think, we're right up against that now. I think it's very difficult to work on the boundary of what is too farness unless you're prepared to work on your own shit, because it will be tested. Certainly that's my own experience of myself, is the more I've experimented and explored this, invariably I come up against the possibility of my own shame. I don't tend to experience shame around this, but I certainly have used it as the opportunity to deepen my own relationship with my wrongness. I am really comfortable admitting when I'm wrong. I have no problem, and I've been well trained by Paul and my lovely wife, who's very good at pointing out when I'm wrong. But joking aside, ask yourself, how comfortable are you admitting to yourself, let alone anyone else, I'm wrong? I'm genuinely being okay with that. I'm wrong. I got it wrong.
And if I may add to that, Steve, I think it's really powerful, because if I hold the opposite end of the spectrum again, I find it personally very hard to be sure that I'm right. And that's the thing that probably gets in my way most of the time.
Yeah. Which is why, Jeremy, I love being in a room with you and working with you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Because we hold that tension between us. I think that's lovely. So in the interest of time, we're going to share with you, I don't know, Jeremy, we're going to have time for the draw. We've only got 5 minutes, so I think maybe we'll leave that on this one. We are going to share with you a set of questions just to take away with you, but I just want to flag to you what's coming next, just so you know. So in November, hopefully, Ben Tai, who's the CEO of Gate One, a consulting firm, we're going to be exploring shame, anger, and the dark emotions in the C-suite. And what happens if we actually talk about these? Ben is the only CEO I've met who's prepared to come out and talk publicly about his own experience of shame, amongst other things. It's been quite difficult to find one. I have. It is helped by the fact that he's got his own psychotherapy practice. That might tell you why he's so comfortable doing it. Then Tiffany Gray, who I met in Australia over the summer, and I spoke to this morning. It's a working title. She's really interesting. There's so much guff being talked about AI, and you can't move on LinkedIn for puddles of AI-ness. What's interesting about Tiff is that she's a practitioner. She's a change and leadership and OD practitioner, and she's been working with this stuff for years. And she really is really interesting in terms of how she is exploring AI in relation to practice. And so I wanted to bring her into this space because I think she might offer something slightly different rather than fetishizing the technology. And lastly, and Emma's on the call on the session today, so she's probably going to throw something at me for mentioning it now, but I felt it would be not fair to not to acknowledge her. I'm going to be joined hopefully by both Atif Chowdhury and Emma to talk about the particular precise angle we're still exploring, but essentially we want to get under the skin of neurodiversity and difference in practice, because it doesn't get really talked about enough in change and OD practice, from the point of view of what exactly is the experience of being neurodiverse in this work, and what does that mean for our clients, and what does that mean for the rest of us, and what stories do we construct and tell about the people we meet who are maybe different to us, and more. I'm talking to more people. So those are things that are coming. And lastly, for one or two people who did ask me, just in case you did want it, there is how you can get the book. It is also an audiobook. If you want to go to bed with me or listen to me in the shower or when you're walking the dog, you can listen to me because I recorded it as an audiobook as well. So just in case. The questions that we want to leave you with.
Steve, before you do that,
yeah.
Liz has put a note on what are the dates?
They're still coming. They're going to be coming. Dates TBC.
Yeah.
These are the questions we want to leave you with. We're not going to read them out. We are literally just leaving them with you. So please take a screenshot. You will get all the slides, so you will have the questions in there. I'll send those to you out afterwards. But if you want to take a screenshot now, where do these come from? They're a mixture of questions from my book, and they are also ones that me and Jeremy were chewing on in the run up to this. They may be useful, they may not. But what we don't want to do is assume that this conversation has an endpoint, because we don't believe it has. And at 29 minutes past the hour, we'll finish there, other than to say thank you for coming to play with us. We've had a blast. We hope you've found something vaguely useful in this. And we hope to see you again at a future event.
Yeah, thank you, Steve.
Go well.
Thanks, everybody.